John's a PhD candidate at Stanford University, and let me tell you a little bit about it. His dissertation, you're still at work on this?
I am, yes.
Good luck. His dissertation is Artist Under Technocracy, which takes us quite a way into the heart of Georgi Kepesh and the Cold War Avant-Garde. You have curated the 2014 show, The New Landscape, which is wonderful. Now, I have a sad announcement to make. You were possibly expecting at this point Sarah Daniels to appear. And I'm afraid she is ill. She's really quite ill. She has a fever, so she won't be with us this afternoon. So I'm sure you'll be sending our best wishes. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by first thanking Ben Burbridge for the invitation to be here. I'd also like to thank Lizzie for help organizing everything. And I'd also like to thank my fellow presenters for their talks and papers, which have been so fascinating today. In 1951, artist, designer, and visual theorist Georgi Kepesh organized an unusual exhibition at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. Kepesh suspended scientific imagery, photographs collected from research laboratories and enlarged onto particle board panels from a lattice of rails in MIT's Hated Gallery. The result was an all-over pattern, projected in 3 dimensions. Visitors could walk around, between, and through layers of images that appear to float and hover. The immersive quality of Kepesh's exhibition anticipated defining shows of the period, like Parallel of Life and Art at London's Institute of Contemporary Art in 1953, and The Family of Man at New York's Museum of Modern Art in 1956. But Kepesh wielded these methods of display for unorthodox ends. Titled The New Landscape, his exhibition revealed an entire world that mid-century viewers had never seen before. It rendered visible the inner structure of microscopic minerals, the outer reaches of the solar system, and everything between the two, from elastic tissue fibers and pools of chemical compounds to dense networks of cells. One of the most awesome and iconic images was the Lichtenberg figure. MIT physicist Arthur R. von Hippel produced these patterns by discharging electric shocks on photographic plates. The fractal-like burst is otherworldly, even supernatural. Kepesh's strange exhibition was preface to an even stranger book. In The New Landscape in Art and Science, Kepesh compiled 453 images spanning the scientific realm, but also the archives of art history. He linked the disparate visual culture of radically heterogeneous fields through isomorphic similarities, thereby producing surreal relationships. Jellyfish imitate Byzantine mosaics. Dragonfly wings evoke Mondrian's grids, and oscilloscope waves from a primitive computer echo the earliest cave paintings. Kepesh articulated these correspondences through the format of the art historical slide comparison, using the book's spine to juxtapose 2 images. A variegated leaf at left matches the cracked desert floor as photographed by Edward Weston. Each serves as an interpretive template for the other. Some pages were more like collages with concatenations of images that seem as if they could continue well beyond the limits of the book. The bud of a twig at left is coupled with a carved Aztec stone, a Chinese jade, a sculpture by Brancusi, etc. While Kepish pulled images widely, even wildly, from an encyclopedic spectrum of fields, he selected and arranged them with a formal precision that hinted at hidden meaning. One panel appears to depict the eerie, crater-strewn surface of a distant moonscape. It actually shows a camel's tongue under 10 times magnification. Fleshy protuberances and taste buds suggest lunar scenery with startling effect. Kepish thus telescoped viewers between perceptual levels, pulling them from the infinitesimally small to the infinitely vast, and all within a single visual experience. He also links the organic to the inorganic by equating a cross-section of a tree with the explosion of another Lichtenberg figure. His book did the same thing. A snowflake mirrors with immaculate perfection the section of a twig. Even black and white are carefully inverted. In this way, Kepish allowed viewers to discover the new landscape by finding latent associations between his images. This task was almost mystical or mythological, similar to ritual acts of divination, like reading entrails, deciphering tea leaves, or counting stars. Appropriately enough, Kepish included a rat's duodenum, the first section of its small intestine, as well as plant leaves and starry constellations among his collection. Von Hippel even described his Lichtenberg figures as, quote, riddles akin to the hieroglyphics of the Egyptian script. Von Hippel would know. Before training as a physicist, he studied art history under Heinrich Böcklin. Böcklin is one of the founding fathers of art history. This dizzying array of patterns from a staggering list of disciplines raises a crucial question. What meaning connects it all? How do we solve these puzzles of art and science, and for what ultimate purpose? I open with this description of the new landscape in order to introduce George Kepish, a figure particularly well-suited to the discussions here today. His work provides an opportunity to explore the relationship between the two cultures of art and science during the Cold War and in the present. To be clear, this relationship is not neutral. So what I really want to tend to here is both the poetics of the scientific image, but also the politics, which happen to be rather charged. First, allow me to situate Kepish at mid-century. Though neither a teacher nor student at the Bauhaus, Kepish worked under former Bauhaus master Laszlo Moholy-Nagy for 10 years. It was from Moholy that Kepish adopted a relentlessly utopian faith in connecting opposites, the qualitative and quantitative, the artistic and the scientific. After arriving at MIT in 1945, Kepish worked tirelessly to create platforms, exhibitions, books, courses for such integration. He termed this interdisciplinary mission interthinking and interseeing. But reconciling art and science was not a seamless process. Indeed, it is easy to find evidence of how tense it was in Kepish's New Landscape book. A text by Walter Gropius, founder of the original Bauhaus, is blunt. Quote, in today's universities, we keep large departments under the name Arts and Sciences, but when we scrutinize their activities, we find that science has everything. This is the century of science. The artist is the forgotten man, almost ridiculed and thought of as a superfluous luxury member of society. Art is considered to be something which was accomplished centuries ago and is now being stored up in our museums, from which we may tap as much as is needed. As science is supposed to have all the answers for a predominantly materialistic period, art is doomed to languish. Which so-called civilized nation today honestly promotes creative art as a substantial part of life? This disintegrating society needs participation in the arts as an essential counterpart to science, end quote. At issue for Gropius was resources and relevance, the fact that science has everything. And yet, the relationship between the two cultures was even more polemical, more political. The uses and abuses of science in this period deviated dramatically from the stated goals of humanistic culture. MIT at mid-century was the archetypal Cold War university. Its hallowed halls were also battle-ready war rooms, inextricably enmeshed in the demands and dollars of the U.S. military's research agenda. Kepish's collaborators were often aligned with sophisticated weapons research. He worked with a metallurgist who prepared plutonium for the first atomic bomb, an engineer who created an early digital computer for the U.S. military, and a mathematician who invented novel ways to simulate thermonuclear war. Media theorist Marshall McLuhan observed in the 1960s, quote, "The artist tends now to move from the ivory tower to the control tower of society," end quote. Kepish is the perfect embodiment of this transformation. In what follows, I want to trace Kepish's aesthetic project in relation to the debates and dilemmas of the Cold War university. And I'll be using ample quotations to do this, so I apologize for all the textual material. Kepish recalled in an interview decades later that he was met with suspicion while collecting his scientific imagery. Quote, "I went from one laboratory to another and was almost thrown out by the scientists. They thought I would distort the meaning of science." End quote. I want to seize on this description of subtle, but perhaps still subversive, infiltration and appropriation. Kepish adopted science's images to new ends that were clearly not scientific. He developed a program for, as he called it, patternsmia and form thinking. The ambition was to use abstract images as tools for perceptual training. Visual patterns might, if understood creatively, alter patterns of thought and behavior. These approaches were part of a nascent field Kepish developed and defined as visual design. The label sounds generic, but Kepish referred not to the design of works of art, not to drawing, painting, or photography, but rather to the design of vision itself. In visual design, the eye was a medium to be molded and formed, trained to see more freely. Kepish's ideas were inspired in part by a set of experimental displays created by perceptual psychologist Albert Ames Jr. at the Dartmouth Eye Institute and referred to as the Ames demonstrations. The most famous was the distorted room, a structure built with extreme exaggeration in perspective created an illusion that the room's occupants were ridiculously small or large. The lesson was that perception is subjective, not objective, that what we see lies in us as observers, in our mind's eye, not in the world beyond. For Kepish, who viewed the distorted room in 1947, this meant that vision really could be designed. Detailed notes in Kepish's papers labeled Education of Vision elaborate the program. Quote, "Form thinking is different from the simple making of little paintings in an art department of the university. Form thinking must penetrate all disciplines of education. How to do it? By making form thinking an educational subject in itself, faculty and a department that specializes in it, that pools concrete materials from other departments, biology, physiology, psychology, art, painting, architecture, music, etc." End quote. Kepish called this new organization a university of vision. Detailed bibliographies reveal Kepesh's wide-ranging research across such disciplines. The reading lists include classic works of art history, such as Heinrich Wolfland's Renaissance and Baroque, and Erwin Panofsky's Perspective as Symbolic Form. Texts by critic John Ruskin, sculptor Auguste Rodin, and architect Louis Sullivan round out the field. Some were more obscure. 19th century painter and printmaker John Burnet's 1837 treatise on painting, hardly a significant text today, served as the source for Kepesh's expression, The Education of the Eye. Such was the title of one of Burnet's essays. As intriguing as these references may be, it is actually those sources from the intellectual margins that are of special interest. Among Kepesh's bibliographies are the Book of Signs, which catalog medieval symbols, biologist Darcy Wentworth Thompson's On Growth and Form, which documented morphogenesis, the development of forms across the natural world, aesthetician Attila Geika's The Geometry of Art and Life, which examined the golden section in art and architecture, and critic Theodore Cook's The Curves of Life, which analyzed spirals of all and every variety. One section of his book compared the staircases in European castles to the interior chambers of seashells. These sources suggest a highly technical, highly rational approach to seeing, a visual methodology for which the entire universe could be quantified and measured. But I want to argue the opposite, that it is the irrational, surreal quality in these texts and images that captivated Kepesh. These scientific analyses of form paradoxically provided a very unscientific, even fantastical way to connect and combine micro, macro, natural, man-made, foreign, and familiar. Paging through the volumes, we find pineapples and pine cones, violins and horns, single-cell organisms and Roman pottery, here compared to one another explicitly, and yet more staircases and seashells. Viewed in their totality, these sources teach us how to relate images and objects. They reveal a unity in diversity, a common pattern. In essence, they instruct us to see more democratically. And I now want to unpack this a bit and think about what does this mean to see democratically through scientific patterns. Kepesh was explicit in submitting his approach to such agendas. For Kepesh, visual design was democratic by its very nature. From his notes, quote, "We must recognize the similarities in the differences. A new age of metaphor must come, one that can use common metaphors for different fields. Democracy must have a terminology interchangeable with art, architecture, biology, physics, and psychology. From the innumerable currents, one needs to develop one common direction," end quote. In another notation, he writes, "Man must understand democracy, must break down archaic barriers, and establish democracy." Such calls for a democratic pattern are of a piece with the period. Walter Gropius, for example, in his text for Kepesh's book, argued that design should develop a superior form of democracy. Those are his words. An educator named Earl Kelly similarly linked the Ames demonstrations to this mission. Quote, "We shall not learn to live with other people democratically until we learn to discard habitual patterns of thought in the light of new evidence," end quote. The new evidence being the Ames demonstrations, the distorted room. This agenda was also made clear in Kepesh's book. A text by the philosopher and semiotician Charles Morris described how the new landscape images became useful tools for visual design. Quote, "The photographs can be used for jarring the self from an ever-settling rigidity, breaking its egocentric boundaries. Contemporary man must be able to move among and between diverse perspectives, He must become flexible. He must open himself. Oddly enough, these photographs from science, though made solely for the purposes of science, can aid man to live in this dimension, end quote. These terms, flexibility and openness, the breaking of mental rigidity, suggest how patterns could activate a new mode of perceptions. Hypnotic lines, vertiginous webs, spirals of concentric circles. They seem to come alive, to scintillate and pulse. Psychologist Heinz Werner called this physiognomic perception of liveliness in abstract formal qualities. His concept is illustrated in a textbook from the period that shows how the appearance of words alone expresses meaning. In an essay for Kepish's book, Werner positioned physiognomic perception as an alternative to scientific rationality. Quote, "This mode of perception differs radically from the more everyday perception in which things are known according to their geometrical, technical, matter-of-fact qualities. It grows, if given the chance, by its own rules and laws to a level not below, but on par with that of logical discourse. The richness of a culture will forever depend on the coexistence of both modes of cognition," end quote. Kepish described perception the same way. In a note on the physiognomy of visual forms, he elaborates. Feeling, color, shapes, lines are dancing, exploding, balancing. They are riveted, dovetailed, bond-molded. They have hydraulics. They are pregnant. They attract and repel, budding, flowering, hovering. They have weights, density. They sit calm or explode. They are shy or brash, audacious or retreating, beating in or out like a heartbeat rhythm, end quote. What are the implications of submitting appropriated images to this program of pattern seeing and form thinking? How does it work, for example, with the Lichtenberg figure, especially once we know more about the image's provenance? Von Hippel produced these patterns for his study of dielectrics, the wave phenomenon of electricity. The practical application of his research was radar. Von Hippel was a principal developer of the technology during the Second World War. To what degree does this lineage, one that traces very clearly to warfare, structure the image? And does our recontextualized, thoroughly unscientific, even physiognomic perception allow us to see past such meanings? And I'm showing here a cover Kepish produced for Arts and Architecture magazine using another Lichtenberg figure. Other images are more direct. In one, the Earth recedes from a camera carried by a V-2 ballistic missile. No doubt this ethereal perspective is sublime, even transcendent. But what about its implacably militaristic origins? For Kepish, origins did not matter. He is emphatic. Quote, "Not what one sees, how one sees is today significant," end quote. The visually random patterns of science were ideal tools for perceptual training precisely because they originated in a rational, technical, even militaristic context. Kepish aimed to change these attitudes and concepts, to solve these conflicts by restructuring vision. But could vision alone really overcome such militarism? To conclude, allow me to fast forward to the 1960s. By then, the Cold War had become hot. Students and faculty had started connecting the dots of a new constellation, the military-industrial aesthetic complex. In a letter to Kepish, Sybil Moholy-Nagy, the widow of Kepish's former mentor, Bauhaus master Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, offers a pointed indictment of Kebish's project and, by extension, of any project that aimed to integrate art and science. It is worth quoting her letter at length. She writes, quote, "If one would take you seriously, it would boil down to a process by which science and technology offered untold riches of social, personal, and material happiness to mankind, and mankind, through failure of vision, failed to accept and use these riches. But even if it made sense to worship MIT while denouncing what its graduates have done to society, isn't the whole premise of your books completely obsolete? No matter how many new puzzles you publish, Yuri, they will never make a total picture. What you need, more than anything else, is to get out of MIT and Cambridge as fast as you can to save your soul and your talents and your integrity. There can be no integration. We can only be saved by drawing new boundaries. I still hope for your disenchantment with the Bauhaus program." Quote. In 1968, Sybil sent a follow-up letter to Kebish on the occasion of a symposium honoring the establishment of Kebish's Center for Advanced Visual Studies, a research institute Kebish established at MIT to facilitate collaboration between artists and scientists. The center was the University of Vision Kebish had imagined decades prior. Sybil's letter was to the point. Quote, "That vehement protest I sent you some years ago would hardly be written by me today, not because I know differently, but because the dehumanization and impending annihilation of American civilization seems to furnish proof for my life thesis that is beyond argument. The staggering guilt of Vietnam lies ultimately with the ideologists of technological progress. Science and technology live by permission of the military establishment. I do hope that the various offerings at the symposia will teach me differently, that the miracle will occur that reconciles what MIT is doing for the war effort with your vision of creativity." End quote. George Kebish believed in the power of images. He eloquently argued that the education of vision could inspire a more democratic way of seeing. This project was utopian, however, in both a positive and a negative sense. It offered a compelling presentation of how we see and how we might see more freely. But it was also blind to the realities of the Cold War. This doubled perspective is the most accurate picture of Kebish that we can draw. Thank you.